Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, strikers, hikers and hairy bikers, welcome along to the Joe Spivey YouTube channel where we discuss books and little else. You join me on a stunted Tuesday afternoon here in Great Britain. That mysterious gaseous orb, known more colloquially as the sun, has not yet made an appearance today, and we have constant 100% cloud cover, so if it is a little dark, that is why. A little bit more housekeeping before we get on with our described book review or appreciation today. You may have seen overnight, again, some of my demographic people tell me that I have a great deal of my audience is from the United States, and so you may not have seen. There was a gentleman a little while ago called David Cameron, now Lord Cameron, who led this country down a complete path of despair. He is the physical delineament, the walking, talking apotheosis of Etonian effortless success. He has had nigh everything handed to him on a plate. He is a pusillanimous technocrat, really, that to solve internal strife in the Conservative Party a good couple of years ago brought the nations to its knees with a particular referendum, which I often mention on this channel, and made a disaster in Libya, and gave fodder for many of his enemies to then use against him, quite rightly, and is now back. He has since been trousering millions and millions of pounds by illegally lobbying the government on all sorts of weird financially secure loans for a private firm, again, for which he's earned millions of pounds, and Mr. Sunak has brought him back as Foreign Secretary. He's given him a lordship, he's given him a peerage, and a seat in the House of Lords, so if Mr. Cameron so wishes, he can park his sheep in my front garden, and I can do nothing I can take no legal action to prevent him. He is a knight of the realm, and somebody that we have to genuflect towards. So he's back. You've got Jack Edwards making videos about openly telling his acolytes and fans, his millions of acolytes and fans, to be deceitful in their everyday lives when talking about books. But beyond that, that's about it. You join me for our, I'm losing track now, fifth instalment of Nonfiction November, the BookTube, the annual BookTube event, originally brought into being by Olive at the book Olive, in which, if you're a cretinous fool and happen not to read any non-fiction at all, we are advising you here to do so. And if you are a glorious individual that does already read non-fiction, then we are telling you to do an awful lot more of it. I touted earlier, or in my weekend video, that I would be reviewing, or at least looking at, Hannah Arendt's On the Origins of Totalitarianism. I did mention at the back end of my book haul on Sunday that it was becoming rather wordy and stodgy, and it went on like that, unfortunately, folks. It was what Steve Donoghue has very, very, very accurately described as textbook work, which is what most people who don't engage very often in non-fiction see as non-fiction, and that's what The Origins of Totalitarianism became. She starts off with the origins of anti-Semitism, and somehow for such a heart-rending and historically confusing and diverse subject, made it very, very dull. I struggled to care, if you know what I mean. I couldn't understand just what she was trying to get across, and I understand that it's riddled with all sorts of difficulty, but she really did not do a very good job of what a non-fiction historian should be doing, which is condensing the information and presenting it in an entertaining way. It was garrulous and wordy and did none of the above that I wanted it to, which is a shame because I've loved her work till now, but anyway. So I've moved on. The TBR has been completely ripped to bits because essentially every single book that I've talked about has not been on my TBR, but in spite of this, we plough on. So today we are looking at Anthony Trollope's autobiography, written in the autumn of his career. And this is odd in and of itself. This is nomadic, at times pedagogical, at times tendentious. It's easily the most fiery work that I've ever read from Trollope. For somebody that is usually, he is in sections of this, he's also as warming and welcoming and armchair providing as he is in his fictional works, but sometimes you get this scathing, abrasive, critical, very assertive individual that you might not have liked potentially in real life. He's very, very, very stern. But yes, this charts his early childhood, which was, as is a common prerequisite essentially of any Victorian writer, was a complete hellhole. His father was impecunious and a little bit irresponsible and careless, and sunk his capital into all sorts of nonsense, landowning, which meant that he didn't have the proverbial pot to urinate in by the end of his life. And so Trollope was a social pariah at school, was bullied and lynched and hit by tutors, and had to, was easily recognisable from a mile away, wore ragged clothes, had to walk, I think it was 12 miles a day to get there and back, he was very, very aware of the miseries of his life, and all of a sudden those vicissitudes started to normalise, and he had a horrid, horrid childhood. Meanwhile, harbouring some, obviously, rather quixotic and dewy-eyed literary ambitions, which would then go on to motivate him to be one of our favourite Victorian writers. His mother was rather literary. That was something I did learn from this book that I had no idea about. She went across the pond to you guys over in the United States when you weren't quite the economic superpower that you are today. And she wrote, the name's going to evade me, but something quite itself a scathing and abusive account of American, daily life. But yeah, that was very successful, and that, Trollope says, put the shoes on her children's, his and his siblings' feet, and a roof over their heads when his dad was, sort of cantering around in a dalliance. And then he, sort of weird nepotistic turn, is then given a job at the post office. I believe it was an in-law that was either already there or had connections. So he's then given a job at the post office, goes over to Ostend in Belgium with his father for a bit. Very, very nomadic early on. Essentially continues to talk about how he does harbour literary ambitions and then eventually goes on to realise them. The reason that this isn't, this has been held against Trollope, I think, his entire life, or after it was published, because he essentially converts the art of literature into something metronomic, something done by an automaton, some product and some quota that you spit out every single day, rather than the rather romantic view, the sort of the poolside gentleman that's in a silk tunic that is gripped with grief from childhood and is therefore going to very slowly and very precisely etch out his thoughts. That was not what Trollope was doing. He was sitting for 3 hours before he would go to his post office work as a letter carrier. And he would be just Flintlock style, just cantering out all sorts of stuff that we all love, but he was making sure that he would get his writing done within an allotted time. He has what the horrid modern neologism would term a grind set. Mr. T definitely did have a grind set, but I've got a few lovely pages to highlight for you. All comes with that usual, typical Trollope joviality and that excellent turn of phrase and the prolonged examination of one or two issues that is typical of somebody of his heft and height. So yes, we'll talk about earlier. It talks earlier on about his ridiculously difficult childhood, and so I will go into that just now. So he is made very aware earlier. He's very introspective very early on. I don't know just how much that is typical of autobiographical work. You hear all the time about, I knew when I was 15 that X, Y, and Z happened, when of course when you're 15 you didn't know that, and you're a completely different person when you're 50. But nonetheless, I think this stands up. So this is Trollope again about the shame directed towards him in early childhood. Something of the disgrace of my schoolboys has clung to me all through life. Not that I have ever shunned to speak of them as openly as I am writing now, but that when I have been claimed as schoolfellow by some of those many hundreds who were either with me at Harrow or at Winchester, I have felt that I had no right to talk of things from most of which I was kept in estrangement. So yeah, he's continually aware that his childhood was really, really difficult, and of course this is the same with a whole host of other of the Victorian daguerreotypes of literature. The next section that I wanted to highlight was when he is very, very obviously a very imposing figure, and he seemed to apply that to all practice. So he managed to keep up a decent social life. He managed to write in magazines write reviews in magazines. He managed to do non-fiction in the West Indies, Australia, and America. He managed to ride 3 times a week and hunt, all whilst doing 250 words a minute for 3 hours a day. So if you folks think you're a little tired or burnt out or burning the candle at both ends, Mr. T and myself are hereby announcing that you are not, sadly. But this is his attitude to writing. But as I had made up my mind to undertake this second profession, I found it to be expedient to bind myself by certain self-imposed laws. When I have commenced a new book, I have always prepared a diary, divided into weeks, and carried it on for the period which I have allowed myself for the completion of the work. In this I have entered, day by day, the number of pages I have written, so that if at any time I have slipped into idleness for a day or two, the record of that idleness has been there, staring me in the face and demanding of me increased labour so that the deficiency may be supplied. According to the circumstances of the time, whether my other business might be then heavy or light, or whether the book which I was writing was or was not with speed, I have allotted myself so many pages a week. The average number has been about 40. It has been placed as low as 20 and has risen to 112. And as page is an ambiguous term, my page has been made to contain 250 words, and as words, if not watched, will have a tendency to straggle, I have had every word counted as I went. You can just see how he seems to very easily and very counterproductively sap all of the fun out of writing, or sap all of the fun out of the appreciation or somebody's take on writing. So can you imagine if you had read for 10 and 20 years all of the Barchester novels, all of the Palliser novels, The Way We Live Now, all of these intricately plotted and yet quite, at times sensual, obsessed with romance and love often, engaged in some really artful dialogue, and all of a sudden you just realise that this bloke's sort of, I don't know, just churning stuff out like a printer. There is a stark and alarming contrast between the beauty of his work and the method undertaken in order to produce that beauty. This is what this work is touted as, and that absolutely rung through to me. Let me just highlight, what else have I highlighted for y'all? So we've got it's third autobiography, third style guide, and a final third as some sort of wider societal analysis of many of his contemporaries and many of the contemporary criticism. So he talks about some of the justice in literary affairs. I'd always felt an injustice in literary affairs which had never afflicted me or even suggested itself to me while I was unsuccessful. It seemed to me that a name once earned carried with it too much favour. I indeed had never reached a height to which praise was awarded as a matter of course, but there were others who sat on higher seats to whom the critics brought unmeasured incense and adulation, even when they wrote, as they sometimes did write, trash which from a beginning would not have been thought worthy of the slightest notice. Yeah, so he talks about the sort of bias of fame and how he deems lots of his contemporaries as being critically carried along by their already canonical handsome, and by them having not to really reinvent themselves or to work very hard on their output in order to be significant. So yeah, he's really very good. Talks much more about his contemporaries and criticism, which I will find here. So he ranks really suitably and quite instructively. He does a sort of hierarchy of his contemporaries. So he ranks Thackeray as his, well, it's not his closest rival because he doesn't rank himself as top, but he says that Thackeray is the most important writer of that generation. He goes on to talk about George Eliot. At the present moment, George Eliot is the first of English novelists, and I am disposed to place her second of those of my time. She is best known to the literary world as a writer of prose fiction, and not improbably whatever of permanent fame she may acquire will come from her novels. But the nature of her intellect is very far removed indeed from that which is common to the tellers of stories. Her imagination is no doubt strong, but it acts in analysing rather than in creating. Everything that comes before her is pulled to pieces so that the inside of it shall be seen, and be seen if possible by her readers as clearly as by herself. This searching analysis is carried so far that in studying her latter writings, one feels oneself to be in company with some philosopher rather than with a novelist. And anybody that's ever read anything other than Middlemarch, even though Middlemarch does dabble in that type of stuff, Romola, I've done a bit of Daniel Deronda since I picked it up a couple of weeks ago. And much of her, I think she did a bit of non-fiction. You do get at that. She can often go on and be a little bit too incisive. Then he goes on about Dickens. He's very, very rude, as one might imagine. Of Dickens, well, he gives him credit, but adduces the criticism that myself and others have in the past, which is that none of Dickens' characters seem real, even though he's touted as a realist. And then he talks about his style. Of Dickens' style, it is impossible to speak in praise. It is jerky, ungrammatical, and created by himself in defiance of rules, almost as completely as that created by Carlyle. To readers who have taught themselves to regard language, it must therefore be unpleasant. And then later on, no young novelist should ever dare to imitate the style of Dickens. If such a one wants a model for his language, let him take Thackeray. So yeah. And then he goes on to detail more of his writerly routine, and he was clearly somebody, given that he grew up in poverty and destitution, clearly somebody for whom material well-being was of paramount importance to him. He never had much money in his life until I think midway through his career, when he started selling advance copies for thousands of pounds, which were actually tens and hundreds of thousands of pounds in today's money. But yeah, it was never about opulence, or never about one-upmanship, or never about notoriety or prominence or fame. It was simply about. It wasn't about accruing riches. It was just about warding off those early wolves of his life. He didn't really care about the big houses. All he wanted was to ensure that much of his family were able to go to school, and equated very often the writing of books to whatever the construction of plumbing pipes and the laying of electricity cables these days, or the building of a brick wall, or any other dull administrative or sort of manual task that we would hate today. He equates literary writing to that, which is probably why Trollope has gone down in canonical estimations ever since, because you don't get the sense of somebody that really loves their art. You don't get the sense of somebody that was a particularly family man. He doesn't mention that an awful lot. There are many, many times in this book where he will give you a little bit of a flake of mundanity and something really specific, about him going somewhere or meeting somebody or having a chat with a significant person, talks a lot about Disraeli, and then we'll just completely dispose with that. And when you think, no, give me another page of what you said to Disraeli, or what it was that brought the idea, or what brought Mrs. Proudie to you, or how did you work on your Palliser novels, what was it like in Beverley when you were running for government? Give me a little bit more. This should be 1,000 pages long from Trollope. He should have spent 2 years of his life doing an absolute, blockbuster, a mega buster, a toe crusher for us. But instead, it's a rather, it's a rather sort of thin and cadaverous thing. But yeah, that was Trollope's autobiography. I loved it, and I felt it lacked a little bit of the usual Trollopian panache. But he was, he's flagrantly critical of many of his time, and if you like Trollope, you're still going to enjoy this, because there's lots of descriptions of how he came to acquire his characters and how he lived with characters. Tells you to focus on characters rather than plotting. So yes, that was Trollope's autobiography. The next thing that we will be doing for Non-Fiction November, again, the TBR has completely gone to the dogs. But nonetheless, we press on. I have what I showed you in another of my book hauls last week. We have William Shearer's The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, which, as you can see, is a toe crusher in and of itself. I've read the introduction to this and could barely prise my eyes away from its pages, and so I think I'm obviously going to have to split this into at least 2 parts, probably 3. So this may class as Joe Spivey's first proper read-along. There is the much-awaited for Byron read-along, which I think I'll save for the new year, where we go through biography and works, but this is going to be absolutely, it's going to be, almost insurmountable. I mean, look at the size of the bloody thing. But we've talked about length on this channel and we're not going to do that anymore. So, that's going to be the next one that I read. Hopefully by the end of the week then that will be out. Or at least the first video will be out for this baying mob of fans that I have now on the internet. But yes, that pretty much does me, BookTube. I'm sorry that it's so dark. It looks as if I'm doing this in some sort of Iranian bunker. It is ridiculously dark, but try being me. I'm the actual person that exists here in the cold and the gloom. But yes, I'm going to go for my afternoon walk. I'm going to take another sip of water, and I'm going to say goodbye, BookTube.